In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Marianne's guests are leaders in their field, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in their own work. They teach others to develop, refocus, and grow. Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. And remember, make every moment count.
Welcome to Moments with Marianne. We have quite a show lined up today. I am so excited to be introducing our first guest, Jere Cage, and he's here today to talk to us about his new book, All Dreams on Deck, Charting the Course for Your Life and Work. Now, Jere Cage is president of the Cage Group, which begins with the premise that there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's only life balance, of which work is an important part. So let's welcome to the show, Jere.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's fabulous to have you here, Jere. Now, okay, so your book is like the go-to book for people looking to really make some dramatic changes in their life and business. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it started from the idea that I think that dreams are the most powerful force on the planet, and we just don't spend enough time, like prioritizing them in our daily lives, be it our work lives or our personal lives. So that's really that's where I started.
Well, and so I know that you took a year off with your family and sailed around the world with your wife and children. Tell us a little bit about that experience and how did that dream come about?
Well, as you can imagine, the experience was an amazing adventure for the entire family. We had a 43-foot sailboat, and we actually took 16 months, and we didn't get all the way around, but that wasn't the plan. We got about 85% of the way around the world, and it had always been a big dream of mine. And one of my wife's dreams had been to travel the world, and so we said, okay, well, that's one we can do together, and we wanted to do it with our kids, and so we took our son and our daughter out of school. Our son was 12, our daughter was 10. So, we just set sail. And of course, it took a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. But what I've tried to do in the book is capture what was the process that we went through, to actually ensure that dream came true. And that's one of the dreams that I talk about in the book, to hopefully inspire your listeners and my readers to actually prioritize their dreams and make them happen.
Well, and I think it's important to have that roadmap because a lot of times people will start the dreaming process and go, you know what, I'm a business owner or I'm an entrepreneur. That could be a little too woo-woo for me, I've got to just, dig in and go, and dreaming's a little much. But that really is the core of everything.
Well, if you think about it, everything around us, this country started as a dream of a country where there was liberty and justice for everyone, not just a few. And at the time, that was a really radical idea. If you think about any business, any brand, any service, any relationship, and actually even every life, because at some point you were a dream of your parents to start a family. So if you really think about it, it applies not just to our personal lives, but it most certainly applies to business as well.
So what are some of the key principles that you use? Because I know that you have a very successful a group called the Cage Group, and you do offer solutions to your clients to improve results and so that they can see their full potential. What are some of the things that you look at first thing when you come and visit with clients or corporations?
Well, I think the critical thing is to understand, first of all, what is the dream of the company, and are they staying true to that dream? So, for example, Kodak had a dream to make photography, when it was founded, to make photography as easy to use as a pencil. And that's why they developed the Instamatic. That's why they took, film developing out of the dark room in your house, and they did it for you. The ironic thing is, of course, when they actually invented the digital camera in 1975, it threatened their basic business model, and so they walked away from that dream, and of course the consequence of that was that they went bankrupt. So one of the things that I do when I sit down with companies is, first of all, get them to articulate, what is the dream of that company, and are they staying true to that dream or not? And then we start to peel things apart from there.
Now, I know in your book you talk about several different things that kind of build to the dream, and you talk about dreaming specifically. Now, if someone's looking to increase their business and just take it in a new direction, would they look at dreaming, like having more clients that are a better fit for them, or a business that just really excels?
Well, I think, sorry, if I can step back for just a second, I think one of the root causes for why most businesses and most people will die full of potential is because, and the root cause of that is that I think that we dream vaguely and we dread specifically. So we have a vague dream of what success looks like in any of the different aspects of either our work life or our personal lives. And, so we have this vague dream of what success looks like. And because it's vague, all of the fears, dreads, obstacles tend to build up, and they paralyze us from ever getting there. And so what I challenge both organizations and businesses to do is the reverse. So I challenge them to flip that on its head and to dream specifically and to dread vaguely, because the more specific you are about the dream, the more time bound, the more meat you can put on that dream, then the more you can stay focused on that. And then you just deal with the fears, the dreads, the obstacles one by one, and they don't end up paralyzing you anywhere near as much. And so that dramatically, I think, increases your odds of actually achieving the dream, be it in, launching a new project, running a company, launching a new brand, rebuilding a service, or whether it's a personal dream of getting fitter or, improving a relationship with a loved one.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you said that. That's probably my favorite quote in your book. Most businesses and most people die full of potential. I'm like, ooh, that is so true.
It is true. Actually, the facts bear it out. Depending upon your source, about 80 to 90% of new businesses fail. And the vast majority of folks, either later in life or on their deathbed, will readily admit that they didn't live life to their full potential as defined by them, not as defined by somebody else, but as defined by them personally.
So the next step in making our dreams, in business and just in life more of a reality, you talk about being intentional and climbing that ladder. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think just having a dream in and of itself isn't obviously is insufficient. I mean, it's critically important starting point, but it's insufficient. So once you have that specific dream, then my challenge is, okay, so how do you get more and more intentional about that dream? And I use this concept called the ladder of intentionality. The lowest rung is if you just think about something, because then there's really no intentionality there. Like ideas come in, they rattle around in your brain for a little bit, and then they leave. And that's not an unimportant step. Because, for some people, like I may say, okay, I have a dream of being a rock and roll star, like as a teenager or whatever. It rattles around in my brain and then it leaves, and no one's the wiser, and there's no accountability, there's no intentionality. For a couple of people, like it may stick. And they may say, okay, well, so I really do want to be a rock star. So then you need to go climb up the ladder of intentionality to the next rung, which is to write it down. This is why we like to-do lists. All of a sudden you can be held accountable to it because it's actually there in black and white. And oftentimes the person that holds you accountable to it is yourself. So we like to cross things off and make it feel like we're making progress. Mm-hmm. I think you take the next, assuming that you're still sticking with that dream, then the next rung up on the ladder is to actually declare it out loud. And then you've taken a really big leap. And you're declaring out loud that you're going to be a rock star or that you're going to sail around the world. But I don't think you're at the highest level of intentionality unless you declare it in such a way, you've declared it out loud, but you declare it in such a way that you actually get other people talking about it. And then two magical things happen. One is you suddenly feel responsible to them for your dream. So all of a sudden your accountability, like your own, like personal accountability, it like steps up. But you also, in my experience, you end up creating a community that helps lift you up towards that dream. And that's, again, what are you trying to do? You're trying to increase the odds of achieving what you define as your full potential.
Yeah, and that's such a good point and brings me to my next question. How important is it to ask for help? Because I know a lot of times if someone's self-employed or, business owners or even just individuals themselves, it's really hard for people not only to ask help, but to accept it.
I know, isn't that weird? Because that's how we learn as kids. If you think about how we learn as kids is by asking questions and asking for help all the time. And yet somewhere along the line we lose that. So I actually think that's a critical component of not just the planning and preparation to make the dream come true, but also I think it takes courage. And I think the more intentional you are about your specific dream, and the better you plan and prepare, you're building a courage muscle that gives you the courage to actually ask for help. And also, by the way, the flip side of that is also for you to give help. So like in a business context, I think a lot of us like to feel like we've got all of the answers, but, it takes courage to sit in front of your boss and say, you know what, I don't know how to do this. Can you guide me? But if you are the boss, when someone's asking you for that help, don't say, well, that's not my job, or wait a minute, I've got all these emails, I'm terribly busy. When someone has plucked up the courage to actually come to you and ask for help, my counsel is give it to them unconditionally and make it a priority.
That's a very good advice. And I think that, when we approach life that way, it just gets that much more richer and fuller. Being able to ask people for help, letting them know, what we don't know and need help with, and being able to really offer help freely as well.
Yes, exactly.
So, and then the next step I know you have is all about the planning and preparing. So,
yes.
How important is that? I know some people like to go flying off by the seat of their pants, So.
Well, and that's why 80% of businesses fail. Let me give you a little bit of an example. I mean, you shouldn't set sail to go sailing around the world without planning and preparing, because then if you make it safely around, then it's more down to dumb luck rather than skill. So if let's spend a little bit of time here talking about the sailing trip. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that every dream has to be a quote unquote sail around the world dream, but it just, I think, provides some good contrast. So
I like that idea, actually.
So we could have had a vague dream. We could have had a dream of one day we want to sail around the world with our kids. And I can guarantee as such that would never have happened because it's vague. So what we did was my wife and I sat down and we said, okay, well, we want to go when the kids are old enough that they can remember it, that they can help, and that it can shape them, but still young enough that it's okay to be with mom and dad and we don't mess up high school and girlfriends and boyfriends and you name it. So that means we need to go when Bradley's 12 and Elena's 10, which means we need to set sail in 2007. Okay, so all of a sudden, the dream got very specific, and the more specific we got about the dream, the more we understood what we needed to do. If we're going to set sail in 2007, what is all the planning and the preparation that we're going to need to do to enable that to happen? And so what we did is we took the kids, like at that point they were like 10 and 8, to boat handling and navigation school, so that if my wife and I were swept overboard or incapacitated in some way, they actually had the skills to be able to continue to sail the boat to our next destination. My wife took marine medical training, and she certainly wasn't a surgeon, but she was just dangerous enough with a skin stapler to scare the kids. She took abandoned ship training. I took marine diesel mechanics. We obviously did a lot of research and planning and preparation on the actual boat itself. So my point is, I think that in a society where we want everything and we want it now, I mean, that's very much, we're used to this sort of instant gratification at the moment. And, oftentimes, if you're really going to fulfill the potential of really important dreams, be it a career dream, be it a launching a company dream, be it a relationship dream, or be it an adventure dream or whatever, you can't shortcut the planning and preparation. You just can't, and then just kind of hope that it's going to succeed. The odds are that won't happen.
Well, and I would agree with you 100% on that. I've known people who have started businesses that are completely outside their industry that they're used to working in, and not really done the research, and then those businesses don't do so well because they just were ill prepared for making just the basics happen. And and I'm sure that with your wife's stapling surgical technique, I mean, no one's getting a cut on that ship,
Exactly.
Well, and so it leads me to the next point, which, is appropriate. It's be courageous, So with any kind of new adventure, there comes that risk, but we have to have courage as well.
Yeah, and I think, so you brought up a couple of things there. One is risk. And we often look at, like pursuing our dream as risky. I don't think that we frequently enough look at the risk associated with not pursuing it. And the risk of not pursuing it, of course, I think is exponentially higher. And that's when you're at the end of your life and you're thinking, gosh, I woulda, coulda, shoulda. I think the risk of that is very high. So that's the thing on risk. I think as it relates to courage, I think courage is really a muscle, and it's just like a muscle. If you exercise it, it gets stronger, and if you don't, it atrophies. And so I think as you're doing this, as you're planning, doing all the planning and the preparation, as you're doing all of the declaring of your intentionality, all of that is actually building your courage muscle to a point where, at some point, we did all of the preparation that we possibly could to sail around the world, but at some point, we actually have to have the courage to untie the boat and venture out into the unknown. And that's what I talk about in the book. And whatever that is, metaphorically, for any of your listeners, is, you're building that courage muscle as you go. And at the end of the day, you have enough to actually go for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's easy to see why so many amazing corporations and companies, have hired you to help them get to the next level, because you have courage for you and your family. You guys have courage for miles, and you how to take those next steps.
Yeah, and again, I think this is really important to underscore. It doesn't just have to apply to the really big dreams. Obviously, it's helpful, in both the big dreams. But as I set up in the book, I don't believe there's any such thing as work-life balance. I think that's a gross oversimplification of us as human beings. I think there is life balance, of which life is a part. And if you think about a lifeboat, which is, again, a nautical term of, if you dump everything into it, it's going to sink. So you need to choose what are the most important components that I'm going to have with me in my lifeboat. And for me, there are like 7. There's my work, obviously. There's my family. There's my friends. There's my spirit. There's philanthropy. There's fitness. So I have a handful. And the reason why the book is called All Dreams on Deck is because I think we should have dreams for each one of those core elements, or what I call grab bags, in our lives. We should have dreams for them all.
Wow. And this brings me to my next question. So let's say we have a business owner, entrepreneurs who want them to go pick up your book, All Dreams on Deck, and they need to go and get that. It's got some great exercises in the back. But what are some things that they can use today, like a tip or just a little tool they can use today to start turning those dreams into reality?
Well, the first thing I would suggest that they do is turn down all the noise and actually spend some time thinking about what your dreams and aspirations are. Because if you think about, I don't know how, I mean, that's the first thing. Just we're so busy, and I'm not denying that we're busy and that we're constantly on and our phones are constantly on and this, that, and the other. But try and find some time, even if it's just in the shower, to kind of get intentional about your dreams and aspirations. That's a really good starting point. I was giving a workshop at a large Fortune 500 company, and the next day this woman came up to me and she was in tears. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? That's not the intent of this whole thing. And she said, I spent the whole evening, and she said, I realized, and she was probably 50, I don't know, maybe 40 or 50. And she said, I've been living off of old dreams. So, while she was young, she had all of these dreams, and yet she hadn't kind of updated them. She hadn't prioritized them, and life had sort of happened. And I said, well, look, the exciting thing is it's absolutely not too late to kind of do a little bit of a reboot. You're only, I can't remember her age at the time, 40 or 50, but you've still got a heck of a lot of time left. So, start now. And I think that's the other tip that I would give. It doesn't matter whether you are a college student just setting out, whether you're someone who is mid-career and stuck, or whether you're someone who's who's successful in business and at the top of the ladder, or whether you've just retired. I think there's still plenty of space and actually a need for any one of those life stages to be prioritizing and spending some time turning down the noise and thinking about dreams and aspirations.
Without a doubt. I think as we get, the dreams I had as a child are much different from the dreams I have now. And then looking forward, I think your book is a great reference point and gives some great insight and tools for people to start refocusing and creating dreams today, for what works today for them. So
exactly. And it's intentionally designed to be a pretty easy read, because actually the heavy lifting is when you go to the back of the book and you're doing the workbook, or what I call your chart plotter for your life. That's heavy lifting, if you will. That's heavy work. So you didn't want the book to be like cold and theoretical. So I've tried to build in a lot of our life adventures as inspiration for folks as they get to the workbook, which is really, as I say, that's where the work really begins.
Well, Jeremy, it's very easy to see why Fortune 500 companies and other corporations hire you to come and talk to their people, because you're amazing. I mean, the insights on your book are phenomenal. I think everyone should, if you're a manager with a team of people working for you, you need to buy one of these for each of the people on your team and your downline or your insurance or however it is. But you need to get this book and give it to everyone you know. So
that's sweet of you to say. Thank you.
Well, Jeremy, thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. Before we say our goodbyes, where can our listeners find you?
Well, they can find the book on the usual suspects like Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. It's actually nationally distributed now, but they can find out more about the Cage Group by going to thecagegroup.org.
Oh, and make sure to sign up for Jeremy's newsletter, get in touch with him, and see how he can be of benefit to your company and your team. So thank you so much, Jeremy, for taking the time to be with us here today.
Well, Marianne, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
It was a great pleasure. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1, 2, 3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
I know we are unlimited, not only because I healed myself with chronic disease in only 3 weeks, but because I know what has helped thousands of my clients transform their own lives. My book, A Short Path to Change, 30 Ways to Transform Your Life, offers 30 easy and quick tools you can use to help transform any aspect of your life. Visit and subscribe to my site, JennyMannion.com, JennyMannion.com, for free gifts, including a guided healing meditation and the first chapter of my book. I look forward to offering you easy ways to help you get clear for the new year.
Ben Wexler is a gifted leadership development and strategy consultant for professionals who want to transform their organizations and careers. Through a uniquely personalized set of processes, participants discover their unique knowledge, how to leverage that knowledge and experience, and then put it all together with a global strategy. You're more valuable, your organization is more valuable, and the change is viral. Contact Ben at 630-881-1074. 630-881-1074.
He's the change management expert, interrupting ordinary lives and making them extraordinary. John Register, experiential keynote speaker, went from track and field Olympic trials candidate and Gulf War Army veteran through a career-ending injury, an amputation, to winning the Paralympic long jump silver medal in Sydney, Australia. Now he shows business executives and college sports professionals how to turn obstacles into opportunities. Book John to speak to your group. Kick off your New Year resolve to create the new normal at johnregister.com.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. Our next guest, Dr. Steve Taylor, is here today to talk to us about his new book, The Leap, The Psychology of Spiritual Awakening. So what does it mean to be enlightened or spiritually awakened? Dr. Steve really dives into this discussion in his book, and there's a good reason why Eckhart Tolle describes Steve's work as an important contribution to the global shift in consciousness. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Steve.
Hi, Marianne. It's great to be on the show.
Oh, it's fabulous to have you here. Now, gosh, once I got my hands on this book, it was so enlightening, and I really appreciate the research that you did in this.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it took me quite a long time to research.
Well, and so I have to ask you, it brings me to our first question. What was the main inspiration for this book?
Well, I usually feel with books, I've written quite a few books now, and I feel that they grow inside me. I don't feel as though I make a conscious decision to write any book. I feel that books slowly grow inside me over many years, and eventually they want to emerge. It's a bit like being pregnant in a sense, although my wife doesn't agree with me when I say that. But yeah, they seem to slowly grow. I often feel that there are a number of books inside me. Even now, I feel that I'm carrying around a few books inside me, and that eventually they will take form and emerge. So this book, I think I first remember being conscious of its presence inside me about 10 years ago. In fact, I remember talking to a publisher about it 10 years ago. So it was already growing at that time. And yeah, so that's all I can say, really. It just sort of slowly emerged inside me. It felt like it wanted to be written rather than me wanting to write it.
Well, I have to say, the books that you have written, I know many people know about them. You're such a great author. And we've got The Calm Center, The Meaning, Back to Sanity, and on and on and on. And so they really have made a major impact, I feel, in just the world at large, and this book as well. So in this book, you talk about the psychology of spiritual awakening. And so what does it mean to be awake?
Well, I think of spiritual awakening as an expansive state of being in which, in many different ways, the world becomes more real and our experience of the world becomes more real. So on the one hand, We wake up to a more intense reality, the phenomenal world around us, the world of things, the world of nature, that becomes more real and more beautiful and more vivid. But it also means connection. Spiritual awakening means becoming connected to other people, to other living beings, to the whole of nature, to the whole of the cosmos. It means transcending separation and realizing that we are part of the great network of being. We are one with the whole cosmos. And it means other things. So it means becoming compassionate and altruistic. It means transcending a sense of group identity and realizing that in their essence, all human beings are one and the same.
I think that's a very good definition for that, and I love how you explain that because it kind of hits on all levels. Now, in your book, you talk about transformation through turmoil, and so and I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit because I found that quite curious. And so, is it more likely when someone's going through a very traumatic experience or a very difficult experience that they'll have a spiritual awakening?
Yeah. Well, sometimes spiritual awakening can be gradual. Sometimes or often people cultivate spiritual awakening through years or decades of spiritual practice or through decades of following a spiritual path. And some people just seem to be naturally awake. Some people seem to be born and to develop a state of wakefulness as they become adults. But for other people, it happens very suddenly and dramatically. They undergo a very radical shift into this expansive, more intense state of being in which the world completely transforms into a different place and their lives completely shift into a different mode. And yeah, that most often, when it's sudden and dramatic, this transformation most often occurs in response to intense psychological turmoil. So it's often people who are diagnosed with a serious illness like cancer, people who suffer a bereavement, the loss of a loved one, sometimes people who are alcoholics who recover from alcoholism or addiction. And often when these people are deep in the midst of their turmoil, when they feel like they've lost everything, then it's almost as if a new self emerges inside them. A new self is born inside them, almost like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. And so the old self seems to die away. The old self seems to be dissolved away by all of the turmoil and suffering they go through. And once the old self is dissolved away, this new self emerges inside them.
Well, so I know there are different types of awakening that you have outlined in your book, and of course everyone has to go pick up The Leap so that they can enjoy your book. Can you go over a few of the different types of wakefulness or enlightenment that people will experience?
Well, there are different degrees of wakefulness, as I call it. So there can be a kind of, let's say, a mild form of wakefulness, a kind of low-intensity wakefulness. And this is probably quite common. When you get into the higher intensities of wakefulness, it becomes more uncommon. But I think probably quite a large number of us experience a kind of low-intensity wakefulness. So in low-intensity wakefulness, we have the heightened perception, which I just mentioned. So the world is quite a vivid and quite a beautiful place. We're kind of struck by the strangeness and wonder of things. Maybe things which many other people take for granted and which many people don't really pay attention to, the kind of mundane everyday things which I'm talking about. But in wakefulness, everything is interesting and strange and vivid and even beautiful. And also in that state of low intensity wakefulness, people will probably still have thought. I call it thought chatter, the kind of involuntary thoughts which stream through our minds. When you're going to bed at night, you're lying there and you can't sleep because there's all of these images and associations flowing through your mind. And in a low intensity wakeful state, people probably still experience that, but they're not identified with their thoughts. So they can kind of watch their thoughts as if somebody were watching a TV screen. They're aware of them, but they know that their thoughts are not really them. so that they're disidentified from their thoughts. And that's quite an important stage, because when you're disidentified from your thoughts, it means that you don't have to let your moods be determined by your thoughts. So many people, when they become depressed, it's because they're thinking depressing thoughts. If they feel unhappy, it's because they're thinking thoughts which trigger feelings of guilt or bitterness or anxiety about the future. But awakened people, they just let thoughts pass by without necessarily being affected by them. So that's low intensity wakefulness. But if you go right into the higher intensities of wakefulness, somebody who's intensely awakened may have a completely empty mind. So maybe they probably still think when they need to. So if they need to decide what they're going to have for lunch, or they need to book a flight, they'll still be able to think for practical purposes. But otherwise, their minds may be completely empty, completely open, completely quiet, and completely empty. And also in this highly awakened state, people, they have a constant sense of spirit being present within the world. So if they look at the sky, they can see the sky being pervaded with a powerful spiritual force. And they can sense that this spiritual force is also their own being. So they can sense this spiritual force pervading everything, including their own being, so that they also feel a sense of oneness with the world.
Well, and gosh, I have more questions than we have time.
We've got another 17 minutes.
We sure do. I'm just going through, it's so, and it just, for me, it's like a breath of fresh air being able to have this discussion with you, because you really have outlined it so well, and it has a roadmap for people where they can kind of gauge where they're at and go, gosh, okay, I've gone through this kind of level of awakening, God, I can't wait to see what happens next. So, I've got to ask, I'm just curious as all get out. So when you had your spiritual awakening, how was that? Was it that intense? Was it gradual? How was it for you?
Well, I discussed my own experience of wakefulness in one of the chapters of the book, and I think of myself as somebody who was naturally awakened. So I didn't become awakened through following a spiritual path or through a sudden and dramatic transformation. When I was maybe 16 or 17 years old, I became aware of a kind of spiritual sensibility inside myself. So I became aware that I was attracted to nature. I was attracted to stillness and quietness. And I felt powerful feelings of well-being and powerful feelings of connection to nature. And I felt a kind of depth and openness within my own being. But I didn't understand it at the time, of course, because I was only 16, 17. I didn't have a religious background. I didn't have a spiritual background. My background was pretty kind of working class. So it took me quite a long time to understand myself. So for a long time, I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought it was crazy because I was so different to other people. So it probably took me 5 or 6 years before I remember it quite clearly. I read a book on mysticism. It was a kind of an anthology of quotes from mystics and from spiritual texts. And when I read this book, I suddenly thought, wow, this is me. This is how I see the world. And suddenly things began to make sense. Suddenly I thought, wow, I'm not crazy after all. And it was quite a relief to find that you're not crazy.
Oh, yeah.
So after that, it was kind of like I went through a process of understanding myself and integrating my wakefulness into everyday life. So for quite a long time, I found it difficult to function in the everyday world. So by the time I was maybe 29 or 30 years old, I felt that I had integrated my wakefulness and I was able to function and I was able to grow in a stable and kind of ongoing state of wakefulness.
Well, and I really appreciate how you shared your story in the book and sharing it with us now, because I think a lot of times people, when they start their awakening process, whatever degree happens for them, a lot of times they're feeling like, gosh, I think I need a padded room. I'm seeing and hearing stuff all the time. At least that's how it was for me. I'm like, oh, I'm nuts. I can't believe this.
Yeah, that's it's quite common, especially for people who undergo a sudden and dramatic awakening. I'm not sure what kind of awakening you had, but when people have a sudden and dramatic awakening, often they don't have a background in spirituality. They're not familiar with spiritual paths or practices. So they really don't have a frame of reference to understand their situation. Mm-hmm. And they often try to explain it to people around them, their family and friends. And of course, they don't understand that. They say, maybe you should go and see a psychiatrist. Maybe there's something wrong with you. And maybe they do go and see psychiatrists, which is probably one of the worst things you can do, because most psychiatrists, unfortunately, are not aware of spiritual awakening. So they usually interpret it as psychosis, and they give people medication, which is quite detrimental to the awakening process.
Yeah, it kind of shuts them off from everything.
Yeah.
And then that's no fun. I mean, gosh. Well, so I know that you talk also, I've been such a fan of yours, and I know that one of the things that you've talked about are the 5 myths of spiritual awakening or enlightenment. And I wanted to see if you could share that with us, because I felt it was quite fitting with everything that we're discussing here.
Okay. I'd be glad to share them. So the first myth is that spiritual awakening is unusual or uncommon. Mm-hmm. And I used to have this belief myself. We tend to associate spiritual awakening with gurus in India, monks in Tibet, Christian monks who spend decades in monasteries. But I found in my research, and I've probably spent about 10 years now researching cases of wakefulness and spiritual awakening. So I found that actually spiritual awakening is not uncommon. It happens to a lot of ordinary people, seemingly ordinary people in the midst of everyday life. People who have no knowledge of spiritual awakening or spiritual practices. They undergo this sudden shift, usually in response to intense turmoil. And the more research I've done, the more cases of this I've found, and the more I've come to be aware that it's very, very common, and that there are probably thousands of spiritually awakened people around us who we don't know about because maybe they don't understand that they become spiritually awakened. Mm-hmm. So the second myth is one we've kind of touched on a little bit already. It's that spiritual awakening is a blissful and easy process. Because often spiritual awakening can be quite challenging, as we've already mentioned, partly because there's a sense of disorientation for some people, a sense of confusion, and also because when it happens very suddenly and very dramatically, there can be disturbances. It's a bit like spiritual awakening can be like an earthquake to the psyche. So it can cause similar disruption to all of the functions of the psyche. So people may find it difficult to concentrate. They may have problems with memory. They may have difficulties dealing with the practicalities of everyday life. And even there may even be physical problems. Some people have a very energetic and explosive awakening, which is similar to what's known as a Kundalini awakening. And that can also cause physical problems. There may be sort of shooting pains, electrical sensations in the body. People may be unable to sleep. So there can be these kinds of challenges and these kinds of difficulties. There can be relationship problems as well. Although I have found that in my research that these difficulties always fade away, even if it takes several years, maybe even 10 years for them to fade away. But there is a very gradual and a very slow process of integration that takes place. But there are difficulties, and spiritual awakening is often not a very blissful and easy process.
Yeah, it is a challenge.
Yeah.
And I know with my spiritual awakening as a child, I would be able to see angels and energy. And, we were kind of a working class family ourselves and Catholic. And so I had an aunt who was a nun and a cousin who was a priest. And you did not see angels. That is not what you did.
Oh, right.
So, shut that off. And then when I had my awakening, kind of where I had my reawakening later, it was like a burst of energy. I was pretty much up for a couple of days just from an energetic standpoint. Yeah.
Did it slowly fade away?
It did. It took 3 days, but, and then it kind of normalized after that. But, it was interesting because I've always seen things that other people can't. And as a child, I wasn't able to discern that, So I was like,
Yeah, I think a lot of children, a lot of people just learn to be quiet, which is a shame. They learn that they can't talk about these things.
Yeah.
But I think eventually people do learn to understand themselves. They gravitate towards spiritually minded people, and eventually it does integrate itself.
Well, I know you're such an inspiration to so many people on their spiritual path, and so I just have to applaud you for the books that you write and the articles that you write as well. I've found them all to be very enlightening.
Oh, thank you. Maybe I'll mention one more. Should I mention one more of the myths which we spoke about?
Oh, yeah.
Another myth is that spiritual awakening is the end point of our development. So many people believe that when we become enlightened or awakened, that's it. We've reached the end of the journey. We've reached the other side of the river, and where else is there left to go? We've reached the goal of our development. Mm-hmm. But it seems to be the case that awakening is just a different journey. It's a new journey. Maybe you could say that it's a journey. It's a transfer. It's a shift onto a different road. Maybe a road that's higher up the mountain that has a different perspective and a more expansive view. But it's still a journey, and we never stand still. Actually, it's a friend of mine who's 95 years old, a guy called Russell Williams, and he underwent his spiritual awakening at the age of 29 in 1950. So he's been awakened now for 66 years, I think. Mm-hmm. And he says that even now, after 66 years, he's still discovering new things, that, his experience is still unfolding and new realities are manifesting themselves and new things are being revealed to him. So wakefulness is not the end point. It's a never-ending journey into ever deeper into reality.
Yeah, it's like a petal that keeps unfolding on a flower. There's a new level that can be attained every time.
Yeah.
Which is, it's sweet because there's no end game to that. It just keeps going deeper and deeper.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and in your book, I know you talk about some characteristics of people who are awakened. Would you like to go over a few of those?
Okay. Well, we've mentioned a few of them already, like perceptual characteristics. We've mentioned connection, heightened awareness, compassion, and I think those characteristics are quite familiar to many spiritual seekers. But I think there are some characteristics which are not so familiar. Awakening brings what you could describe as a different relationship to the world and a different relationship to other human beings. So many human beings who live in a state of sleep, a kind of normal, restricted state of awareness, they have a strong sense of group identity. So, you could define yourself as American, English, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, whatever, Democrat, a Republican, a socialist, and so forth. And these are group identities which many human beings have or cling to. But in awakening, the sense of group identity completely fades away. So people have no notion of belonging to a certain nation or a certain race or ethnicity or a certain religious group. Everything opens up, and we realize that, if we belong to anything, we just belong to the human race, and that's all. And in a similar way, awakened people have a very all-encompassing sense of empathy and compassion. So they don't give preferential treatment to people who are similar to them, people who have a similar background or ethnicity to them or religion. They treat all human beings with the same indiscriminate, unconditional compassion and love. And also, awakened people, they tend not to live in a materialistic or accumulative way. So for many people in a sleep state, life is about accumulation. It's about accumulating more material goods, more money. It's about accumulating more status or more power. But for awakened people, that desire to accumulate just fades away. And it's replaced by a desire to contribute. So rather than accumulate, you contribute. You want to contribute to the human race's evolution. You want to alleviate the suffering of your fellow human beings. And that becomes the main motivation of your life, the desire to help and to contribute.
Mm. Well, and I know in your book also, The Leap, you talk about collective awakening. So what is that? And is that something as a society we're going through right now?
It doesn't seem like it at the moment. if you look at the news, I was watching the news earlier and I thought, wow, it doesn't look good at the moment. But we have to remember that, right now it's just a tiny pinpoint of time, a tiny pinprick of time over centuries of slow development. So I do think that over the last 3 centuries especially, there has been a collective awakening taking place. And I think there are definitely some signs of that right now. Mm-hmm. So I think of awakening in evolutionary terms. And if you think about evolution, we normally think of it in terms of living beings becoming more complex, moving from simple-celled creatures to organisms with nervous systems and brains, and complex organisms like mammals, and ultimately human beings with 100 billion brain cells in our heads. So evolution is this kind of increasing physical complexity in life forms. But evolution is also a process of intensifying awareness. It's an inner process by which living beings become more aware of their surroundings, more aware of themselves, more connected to other creatures and other living beings. And spiritual awakening is just a continuation of that process. Spiritual awakening is a process of expanding awareness, increasing connection, deepening sense of your own inner being. So I think that when we become spiritually awakened, we're following the process of evolution, and we're also contributing to the process of evolution. And I think the fact that so many people now are becoming spiritually awakened and also having temporary awakening experiences is evidence for the fact that a kind of evolutionary shift is underway.
Well, I think I have time for one more question here. In your book, you also describe about the dangers of becoming a spiritual teacher. And I know there's kind of a trend for when people go through their awakening process or learn some information, they want to immediately become a teacher for other people. So what are some of those dangers?
Well, one danger is that when you become awakened, it doesn't necessarily wipe the slate clean. Mm-hmm. It doesn't necessarily wipe away all your personality flaws and all your, psychological tendencies. So it can take some time, maybe sometimes years, for your psychological flaws to fade away and your tendencies and characteristics to fade away. So when people become spiritual teachers, especially if they become spiritual teachers quickly after awakening, often the role of being a teacher exacerbates certain tendencies inside them, or it kind of heightens certain personality flaws. And so if there's a tendency towards narcissism, for example, or a tendency towards power seeking or authority seeking, those tendencies are heightened and exacerbated. And it can, unfortunately, lead to, corrupt and exploitative practices as a spiritual teacher.
Of course. Well, yeah, it's something for people to just be made aware of as well as they start their journey. And And I really think your website's a great place for people to start. Of course, we want them to go and purchase the book, The Leap, but they can be part of your community on your website at StephenMTaylor.com. And so, Dr. Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us today and to share all this great information with us.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Marianne. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Steve. It's been such a joy to have you on the show. Please let us know when you have any new books coming up. We would love to have another conversation with you. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to tune in today. If you'd like to learn more about the show, please visit momentswithmarianne.com and feel free to email me any questions, suggestions, or any comments that you have in regards to the show. Make sure to check out the Moments with Marianne book club, The Leap by Dr. Steve Taylor, and All Dreams on Deck by Jere Cage are listed there with easy links to Amazon where you can go and purchase the book. So I'd like to thank all of you again for taking the time to tune in, and remember, make every moment count.
Join us next time for Moments with Marianne, when host Marianne Pestana brings another inspirational gifted leader to help us grow. Tune in every second Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for Moments with Marianne, when the Dream Vision 7 radio network is at 1510 a.m. Boston. Or catch Moments with Marianne every Thursday and Friday at 5 p.m. and 5 a.m. Eastern Time by going to dreamvision7radio.com. To learn how Marianne started her business from the ground up, visit mariannepestana.com. Don't miss this, and remember, make every moment count.